Hello everyone, this is Gary, and today we're looking at 3 delegation tips for managers. Now I know how it is. You've got a department, maybe you've got a team, perhaps you run a business, and you seem to be doing everything yourself. Well, the solution is delegation. Maybe somebody's told you need to delegate more. Maybe you are trying to delegate and it's just taking up too much time, which just defeats the purpose. And what you need is a couple of tips on how to make that better. Well, this is the video for you. It's going to look at how to delegate well as a manager. The things we're going to cover are basically these. First of all, you've got to get the balance right. You've got to get the balance right between the kind of tasks you delegate and how much you delegate. You have to avoid delegating too much routine, because that is just completely disincentivizing to the person to whom you've delegated it. And you've got to balance the routine and interesting tasks so that there's a right mixture of tasks that have been delegated in the first place. And you've got to share that bigger picture with others about what it's all about. You've also, I would suggest, got to do it in stages so that you can get feedback as you progress to see how the delegation is going. In other words, don't do it all at once. The other things I want to look at is how you clarify the outcomes. You see, delegating is also about telling people what it is you want them to do in a clear way so they know what it is that will be the test of the measure of their success in the task that you have delegated. So that's often about goals and milestones and KPI and about SMART actions, which we'll come on to later. And then finally, it's about just understanding the fundamental of delegation, and that is that delegation is not abdication. So we'll be covering that in the video as well. You are still the boss, you are still the manager, and the buck still stops with you. So when you delegate, you've got to manage the process through to a successful outcome. But having covered in this introduction a brief outline of what we're going to be dealing with, well, let's just get into it. So without further ado, and with bated breath, here we go. Let's get into 3 delegation tips for managers. Okay, so let's get into it. We're looking at 3 delegation tips for managers. In other words, how to delegate as a manager. These are my 3 top tips for that. My other tip, of course, is always to read the small print. So, tip number 1 is don't overdo it. It's important to balance the delegation of routine and interesting tasks. You can't give all of the most difficult, challenging tasks to one poor person, or indeed all of the mundane, routine tasks to one poor person. You've got to strike the right balance. And when you delegate tasks, you've got to share the bigger picture. What is the purpose of these tasks tied into the business objectives, so that the person to whom you've delegated the work understands why they're doing it and feels part of the bigger picture, part of the common enterprise. And that will help to build trust within your team. And you've got to delegate in stages and get feedback at each stage so that you can see how it's going and you can adjust and adapt accordingly. Okay, so tip number 2 is clarity about outcomes. If you're delegating something, you've got to be clear how you will measure success so that the person who is doing that job knows what they've got to do in order to have done it successfully. That means goals, it means milestones, it may well mean KPI. What are those? Key performance indicators. In other words, the methods by which you'll be measuring success. And you've got to make sure that the actions you require them to do are SMART. They've got to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed. And that way you create some clarity about the outcomes you expect. And finally, my tip number 3 is that it's still down to you. You are the manager after all. So delegation is not abdication. Simply because you've delegated it, you've not passed responsibility, accountability. It's all still down to you because you are still the manager. You've not abdicated your responsibility. You are still responsible for these things. You're as much as part of it as you were before, so don't forget that. and help that person to whom you delegated that job achieve that job successfully, because ultimately it will reflect on you. You also have to put in the effort if it is to succeed. It doesn't happen by accident. Delegation is something which is a task in itself for you as manager, and if you want it to succeed, you've got to put in the effort. But if you do all that, then delegation will go well, it will help your business objectives, and it will make your team stronger. And it is as easy as that. Okay, so that was 3 delegation tips for managers. In other words, how to delegate as a manager. And if you're still with me, well, thanks very much for watching and sticking with it this far. Now, just to recap, we covered really 3 tips. The first one is not to overdo it. It's important to get the balance right between the type of work that you delegate, that balance between routine and interesting tasks, and the extent to which you delegate to your assistants in your department or team. In other words, do it in stages, get regular feedback so you can see how it's progressing, and share the bigger picture, because that will build trust. The second major tip was really to be clear about the outcomes of the delegation. In other words, how it is you're going to measure whether the job has been done successfully. Now that means sharing some goals, some milestones, maybe some KPI, in other words, key performance indicators, so that the person to whom you've delegated the task has a better understanding of what is expected of them. And of course, you need to build into the delegation some SMART actions, which we've talked about. The third tip really was that it's down to you, as it always is, as the manager, because the buck stops with you. So if it's delegation, it's not abdication. And that means that you've got to make sure you manage the process of delegation. You just don't simply let go of it, you follow through, you stay on top of it, but you don't want to be too much on top of it. You want to make sure that you know what's happening, and you've got to put in the effort so that it is going to succeed. And if you can do all those things and follow those 3 tips, well, successful delegation and your life as a business manager will be much better, and it is as easy as that. So, if you like this video, please mark it as a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe. But apart from that, all that is left for me to say is thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.